What's up everyone and welcome to this course. My name is Claudio. I've got a tutorial for you to teach you how to use a plugin from a company called 3DK Studio. It's called Spline Flow. It's a parametric spline modeling plugin. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples and all the tools and techniques that this awesome plugin can do for you. I will of course leave the link at the bottom for you to have a look at, and you can see all these awesome examples of all the great things that you can actually do with this plugin. So let's jump into Max and we're going to run through every single setting that it actually comes with, and I'm going to explain everything for you. Okay, now that we are in Max, you can see I've got something very simple. All I've done is I've created a circle, nothing special. I've got a rectangle and I've got a star. And what I've done over here is I've actually just created a straight line. Now underneath the rendering tab we can obviously deactivate the thickness of these objects just like that. It's really not an issue. So there are our objects right over there. Let's go into the creation panel. Underneath shapes right over here, KStudio, Spline Flow. Click to obviously activate it, and then I'm going to click and drag, and you can see the icon appears, SF obviously standing for Spline Flow, and that is telling us that we've placed the parameter inside Max, and now all we need to do is actually attach the path and the shapes to this object. Once it is in your scene, go to the modify tab, and then we have this giant menu over here which we'll go through one by one so you can understand everything that this thing can do for you. So let's close all of these and start at the very top. Underneath rendering, you'll recognize this as the standard parameters that comes with any spline, so you can obviously enable the thickness, radial or rectangular, so we can actually skip this, it's not a problem. Interpolation, again, exactly the same, skip that. So the two most important ones to start off with will be shapes and your path. So I always start with my path and then I add in my shapes. Doesn't matter which approach you go for, I just find it better to add the path straight away. So the path that I've created is obviously this one over here. It's a straight line. It can be a curve, it can be a helix, it can be absolutely anything that you want, but just remember it has to be a spline. So selecting my spline flow, I'm going to say pick path right over there, and I'm going to click on the path that I've created. So you can see that blue line's just been created there. The next thing we want to do is actually attach the shapes to this path. Now I've created 3 shapes just so we can see the differences. I'm going to click on pick. Let's start with the circle, and immediately you can see that a circle has been created from the start to the finish. One thing to note, it is already thick over here and the interpolation is maxed out because I've got these options activated over there. And of course if I go under interpolation and deactivate adaptive, you can obviously choose the amount of points that you want over there. I always find adaptive is the best, especially if you're working with curves. And then just activate those so you can see it. So we've got the circle. We can pick another object. I'm going to click on the rectangle right over there. And now what's happened is it started with the circle and it's ended with the rectangle. And then I can pick another object. So I'm going to click the star. So now we have the actual order of circle, and as I click on circle inside this shapes panel over here, it's highlighted red to show me the actual object that I've selected. So rectangle and star. Circle, rectangle, star. Now this really helps if you have multiple objects and let's say they're all actually rectangles or squares, just different sizes. It's really useful that when you click on one of them you know which object you're actually selecting. So let's concentrate on shapes over here. We just learned what picking does. We can remove the object. So obviously if I click on the star, which is this guy over there, and I click remove, it removes it. Simple as that. Click pick again. Let's add the star back in there. Replace is a really cool function. Instead of removing something and then adding a new object, you can simply just select replace. For example, if I select the star and I want to replace the star with the circle again, clicking the star, click replace, and then clicking my circle will now replace the star with the circle, which is pretty cool because now I've got circle, square, circle. This button over here will select the actual mesh of the object. So again, if your scene is pretty big and there's a whole bunch of objects and you can't really find the object or the spline that you have created, you can simply click this button over here, and as I click on that, it immediately highlights and selects the object for me so that I can come over here and I can manipulate it. So now it's important to know that if I change this parameter over here, so I've clicked on the original object over there. If I increase this, so let's just double that so we can see the difference. If I increase that, it automatically updates what we have selected over here. So that's really important to know. Do not come in here and actually scale it. That is not going to do anything to the size of the object. Make sure that when you are wanting to change a parameter, length, width, height, whatever the case is, make sure that you come into the actual parameters over here and change the original parameter. And this is why it's important to not convert it to an editable spline. As soon as you convert that to an editable spline, you are going to lose all of these parameters, so therefore you cannot change anything. Okay, next on the list, let's select the Spline Flow object. Now, over here, we've got the ability with these two arrows to actually change the order. So if you can see, I've got circle, rectangle, circle. If I select rectangle, highlights it over there, if I press the down arrow, it will shift it downwards, and then it's going to change the order of the item. So right now I've got circle, circle, square, and exactly what we wanted over there. The disable function, again, is really cool because if we want to change or experiment to see which shapes do look better, we don't necessarily have to remove and then continuously add, remove, add, remove. What we can do is just disable it. So for example, let's put the rectangle back in there. If I want, for example, let's pick a star right over there. So now I've got 4 objects. If I want to see what it's going to look like without this extra circle, I can simply select the circle, that one over there, and just click disable. By doing that, it is still keeping it in the list, which is really handy because then I don't need to add it again, and I can see what the effect is going to be. And then of course, selecting and unticking disable will obviously re-enable it. The reverse function allows you to actually reverse the direction of the shape. Over here we've got axis. Now over here, this is important to know that there's an option that says apply to all. That is telling us if we have multiple shapes on our path, it is important to note that each shape can get its own axis alignment. What I mean by that is the following. Let's select the circle, which is this guy right over here. Use axis Z. Let's press X, and you can see it's now gone to the X axis, which is awesome. All of the others have stayed that way. If I tick apply to all of them will follow suit. If you want them to be different, obviously you would select the one that you want. Let's select the star, go over here, press the Y or the Z, and you can see it's changing the shape. Apply to all, again, applies whatever you've chosen here to all of the shapes. So that is the shapes section over here, really important. Next we have the path. Now we just learned that we can obviously pick the path. We can remove the path, which obviously will remove that. This button here will select the mesh. So if I select that, it is immediately going to select the actual path object that I've chosen. And again, what I meant by parametric is the following. If I change the path, it is going to update the actual spline flow, which is awesome. If I right click and just go to Bezier, right over there, what I can do here is I can curve it, and you can see it is immediately updating it. I can go into interpolation. Let's make sure click adaptive. It's obviously smoothed it out, and whatever I do to this path will obviously update it perfectly. Back to Spline Flow. Okay, so pick path, remove, and select mesh. We just discussed the use axis. Again, if I change it to the X, it's going to change the orientation to the Y and to the Z. Next is the align follow option. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unhide this section of here, which I've already prepared objects for us to have a look at. So the Spline Flow path that I created is this shape right over there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create just a standard, let's choose a circle for now, no issue with this. And what I'm going to do is select the spline parameter, and the path is already picked, which is this guy right over here. You can see it. I'm going to pick the circle that I created. Now, have a look at how it's immediately followed the actual path, which is really awesome. You can see that it started up there and then it drifted down, up, and it's actually curved all the way around. So that's really important because now the align follow is set to vertical. If I click on none, it is just plain and simple the circle, no orientation on the circle. It is following the path shape. That is true. But the orientation of the actual shape itself, meaning the circle, is just copied all the way across, which looks really, really boring. If I change it to vertical, have a look. The shape now is actually following the path and the orientation of the path. So you can see that the circle of here is curved and it's following, and it ends over there. The last option over here is the actual spline. So what this is going to follow the shape of the actual spline and the orientation. So you can see just by that example what I'm talking about. Just for now, and I will run through this parameter, I'm going to increase the density to 100, just so actually, let's do it quite high, 500, so you can actually see the difference. Let's go back into a line, none, so you can see it's warped over there because they're all following basically no direction. If I go into vertical, you can see what it's done. It's followed right through all the way. And then the last one, if I choose spline, you can see how it's perfectly followed the spline. Okay, let's start with a clean slate quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rectangle over here. Let's make it a bit thinner and create another one. And then let's create an actual path. Let's go into KStudio. Let's grab a Spline Flow. Now what I want to show you in the last section over here for the actual parameter underneath path is where the path is when you create the Spline Flow. If I come here and say pick path, what's going to happen is wherever I drew the icon, so the Spline Flow icon, if I click on the path now, that blue line is indicating where the path is. So I can move where it is. So if I click on pick shapes 1 and 2, I can move this path wherever I want it. The thing is, if you want your path to be a specific place in your scene, so let's say you drew the path specifically in your environment and it needs to go exactly where it is, what you can do is simply click the link to path. So let me show you where that is. Right here, link to path. As soon as I click this button here, it's going to take the spline flow that we created and it will attach it to the actual path wherever you created it. So as I click on it, there it goes there. Now, I cannot move this. It is linked to the actual path that I created. So the only way to actually move it would be to move the actual line or the path that you created. And of course, by manipulating the vertices, you obviously are manipulating the actual path. So remember, if you want the spline flow to follow a path specifically where you created, make sure you link it together. Okay, I'm going to delete this. So we've got a new one, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the path and of course the two shapes, 1 and 2. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I want to explain to you the distributions. So let's hide these two layers over there. We got curvature, amplitude, and density. So the first thing that we need to realize is that if I change the curvature or the amplitude, nothing's actually going to happen. And that is because we have too few shapes from start to finish. We need to control that using the density. So let's just reset this to 0, 0 quickly. Density of 100. You can immediately see what we've done. We've increased the actual amount of shapes from start to finish. If I go to 200, obviously that increases even more. So the curvature and amplitude both at 0, density 200, you can see the amount that we have. What curvature and amplitude are going to do for us is we are going to be able to create a curve. And remember, you need to have 2 objects or more for this to actually work. So the curvature is going to be able to create a flow or a curve for us, and then the amplitude actually creates a sine wave. So here's an example of a sine wave. As you can see, it's just a bunch of curves as well. So this is what is going to be able to happen by manipulating these 2 parameters. So let's zoom in here a little bit and have a look. So the curvature is going to make a curve for us. The amplitude will be able to create a sine wave for us, as the example that you're seeing on your screen now. So what we need to do is we need to experiment. If I put curvature of 100, you can see all it's really done, if I go into the top view, is that it's finished off this slope and it's actually made it completely straight there. But then that doesn't look right. The amplitude as well, if I put into 100, not much is really happening here. And that is because mainly we only have 2 shapes here. If I go underneath shapes, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pick the big shape again, and then the small shape, big shape, small shape. Now, so it's gone big, small, big, small, big, small. Now what we can do is we can actually experiment with the curvature and the amplitude, and I'll be able to show you some really cool examples. So amplitude at 0, and as I increase the amplitude, you can see that it's decreasing and increasing. The curvature will actually curve the actual shapes for us. And again, remember, the density is really important. So let's experiment 300, 400, 500, and now you can start seeing what it can do. So, great shapes. You just need to experiment with the curvature, as you can see over here, and the amplitude. Next we have rotate before transformation. So this one can be a little bit tricky. I've got an example for us to have a look at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick my path, which is the helix that I created, so you can see right over there, and I'm going to pick my one shape and my second shape right over there. Okay, now the rotate before transformation, if I increase it to about 500, you can see that it's kind of just going in one direction, which we've already discussed how to change that with regards to the align from. So if we remember, if we choose none, it's not going to follow anything. If we choose vertical, it is simply going to follow the vertical. And then of course we've got the spline method, which follows the splines orientation as well. And then looking here, it says rotate before transform. So if you tick this on and off, nothing's actually really happening here. And that is because you have to tell Spline Flow the different rotations for each object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump the gun and show you what transformation does just in one example. Rectangle 003, I'm going to change the rotation. I'm going to click here 360 degrees and press enter. What is really important to understand is that all the shapes have their own transformation parameters, which means if I click on 004 over here, you'll see that it is not going to be 360 degrees. So what that means is that each shape has its own transformation parameters. So I'm going to come in here, choose negative 360 degrees and press enter. So what we need to do now is just untick rotate before transform. So let's have a look what this looks like. Right now, all we have is just a whole bunch of these rectangles from the small, curving around and eventually becomes the big one. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to untick this. And as I untick that, have a look what it's actually created for us. It started at the small and it's rotating continuously all the way until it gets to the big one. And that is why I changed the parameters of negative 360 and the rectangle 3 of 360. Now, if I change this to 180, for example, and obviously rectangle 004, put on 0, you can start seeing how that does manipulate everything. So now you can start realizing that there are an infinite amount of shapes and designs that you actually can create from this. And remember, the great thing is because it's parametric, all I really need to do is just manipulate the actual helix, and it changes everything and it updates perfectly for you. So remember that cool trick, rotate before transform. The last option under distribution is constant density. So I've got a great example here supplied by KStudio. So if I scroll through, have a look how amazing the actual animation looks. Notice how these pieces are all actually becoming a bit smaller. Now this was controlled during an offset animation. So as I scroll across, it looks really, really good. If I tick constant density, what it's telling the animation is I want to keep the same density of each object that's been animated. As I do that, have a look. It does not look as realistic and accurate as it should be. In fact, it just looks like they're actually busy disappearing. So again, another great feature. The last one is called explode. So let's just zoom out here. What explode is actually going to do, if I click on it, it creates a instance of the actual object. So it's grouped it for us right over there. You can see it's grouped. So if I click and ungroup, you'll now see that I have all of the actual splines as individual pieces, so it has exploded it for us. And then of course, if I come over here, I can update it. What that means is, let's say I have completely changed basically all the parameters. If I click update, it is going to update the instanced version for you. So again, cool feature. Okay, let's delete these guys. Let's go back into this one over here. I'd like to show you the modulation. So the modulation, you need actually a very high density of this. So I'm going to increase this. Let's try 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. 600 looks good. So the density of 600, and what I am going to do just for now, let's actually just remove a couple of these. So we've only got those two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to activate modulation, and now I've got freedom to manipulate any of these actual parameters. Now the modulation is going to allow us to create waves, sine waves, and manipulate the curves of these waves. We've got three types. We've got type 1, type 2, type 3. We've got frequency, which is how often the wave happens. The amplitude is going to produce the wave, and then the phase is going to shift the start and end points. Now this works really well with high density objects. So let's start with type 1. Now frequency and amplitude do work hand in hand, so let's put this at 1, frequency at 1. Now we can manipulate this. So now you can start seeing that little curve or wave that I'm creating. So if I keep this at, let's say, 5, we have created 5 waves. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The amplitude, remember, this actually produces the wave. So think of it as the strength of the actual wave that you're busy creating. That's type 1. Type 2, you can see the difference already. And then type 3, again, remember, experimentation with each one will actually show you what each one does. The phase, as I've mentioned, shifts the start and end points. So let's go back to wave 1. Let's just increase this a little bit. Now if I go to phase 0, I can actually shift the start and end points depending on where you want the wave to start and where you want the wave to end. The strength parameter is basically telling you what strength you want each X, Y, and Z to actually be. So for example, if I take the Y and press that at 0, you can see that I'm actually just manipulating the strength on the Y, and obviously the X and the Z can do that as well. If I go back into top view just to show you what this is actually going to do for us, let's put this back at 100. The limits, we can start and end it at any given point. For example, if I only wanted to start at, let's say, the 25% mark, that's what it's going to do. So you can see this is roughly 25% and it goes all the way to the 100% mark. If I wanted to end at, let's say, 85% and press enter, that's what that is for. So you can actually control the amount that you want and where it starts and where it ends. The last tab is called transformations, and I've already set up a scene for us to actually work with. I'd like to show you that the one rectangle has a pivot point at the top, second is in the middle, and the third one is actually at the bottom. Now it's important to know that the pivot points are very important because that's where the path is going to pick up that object. So I've created my spline flow. Let us go underneath path and pick path right over there, and of course, as usual, let's pick 1, 2, and 3 shapes. Now have a look where they actually start. So if I click on the top, this is the top, the pivot points start there, the middle one's obviously in the middle, and then the bottom starts over there. So that's where the path has picked them all up. Now previously I mentioned that the transformation tab is unique to each object, so it's very important to remember that. For example, the top shape, which is this guy right over here, if I change the offset, let's say 50%, have a look what I've done, and it's only applied to that object. I can change it in the Y and change it to the Z. I can change the rotation. I can also change the scale. Now notice that there's a lock key, so it's uniformly scaling it. If I unlock it, then obviously I can manipulate each one independently. So just remember, transformation, each shape individually. So let's reset this all the way to the end, and we have the original shape. Let's jump to the top now. So underneath pivot alignment, we got 3 options. We got pivot align, original pivot, and vertex pivot. Let's start with vertex pivot. If I click vertex pivot, there is a number 4 there. It's telling me that there are 4 vertices, and therefore 4 vertices means 4 different pivots that I can follow. This is my float value, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So notice how it's pivoting to each vertex that there is. If I go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all it's doing now is just scrolling through all of them. So if there was a pivot point over here, over there, or over there, it would allow me to pivot there. And we can test that out. This right here is the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this to editable spline, which is fine. I'm going to go underneath the vertex mode and let us actually refine a 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I've added 4 extra vertices to this object. Underneath Spline Flow, what I'm going to do now is realize that, look, there's 8 vertices now, which is awesome. So let's scroll through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So it'll scroll through all the vertices for you. If we go underneath original pivot, it is going to obviously go to where the original pivot is of the actual object, which happens to be at the bottom. If I want, I can then choose the pivot align function. So it will start off in the center of the actual object, and now I can use this tab over here to manipulate it to fit any pivot that I want according to this. So top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right, right, left, up, down, and obviously in the middle. So that's the transformation tab. And if I want to, I can apply the pivoting to all the objects. So let's say, for example, I want them all bottom left. I can click apply all, and they will then go to the bottom left hand corner, which means it is going to ignore the original pivots that the object was created in. So now that we understand all of the parameters, these are a couple of examples that I'd like to show you on what can actually be created just using the Spline Flow. So these examples were supplied to me by KStudio, and I'd like to show you a couple of them. So these are really cool coffee tables. You can see they're really awesome and very simple to actually create. Basically two shapes right over there. Next, I actually have this really cool object over here, and guess what? You can actually animate it as well. So if we click the play, have a look how cool that looks. So remember, the parameters inside Spline Flow can actually be animated as well. Here's another object that is a perfect example to explain the parametric modeling. So this shape right over here is created just by those two shapes over there. Now, if I come inside here and I go into the vertex mode, have a look. I can actually manipulate it, and in real time it actually gets updated. So if you were not using Spline Flow, you would 100% have to remodel everything from scratch had you made a mistake. This is where the true power of Spline Flow comes in, that everything gets updated automatically, and it's going to save you a lifetime of actually remodeling everything from scratch. Another example over here, I've got these shapes right over there. I've got my path right over here, and have a look at the cool shape that actually was created using Spline Flow. Same concept over here, these two shapes, simple path, and there we go. And as the last example, I like to show you all the different kinds of things you can create just by manipulating the modulations parameters. So have a look at option 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can start seeing how actually powerful this tool can actually be for you. These kind of modeling would probably take you a couple of hours to do, but with the Spline Flow plugin, it's actually going to speed up your flow and actually be able to create some really awesome stuff. So have a look at the link in the description as well. Have a look, there are a couple of other plugins that I will be covering in later tutorials as well. I've already covered a few, but I'm going to be planning to cover as many as I get my hands on. And that's it for this one. So if you liked the video, hit the like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.